Well, I've just finished my second game jam. As a quick recap, the Ludum Dare is an event where thousands of developers try to make a small video game over a single weekend. I did it back in April, and I have a video about that event. I'll put a link to it up in the corner if you want to check it out. The October event started on Friday the 1st, but I was pretty anxious leading up to it, so I got a head start. You can decide if I cheated or not. I used a program called Figma to start designing my UI ahead of time. As far as I understand, this program is intended for web designers to mock up web pages really quickly. I can't automatically bring my results into my game or anything. It was just a convenient way to get some ideas down and see how they looked. The night before the jam, I finally opened up Unity, started a new project, and began rebuilding those screens in the game. This let me have scene navigation all hooked up and ready to go, so I wouldn't need to spend any time on it during the weekend. The theme wouldn't be announced until Friday at 6 p.m., so I wouldn't know what kind of game I was making until then, but I had decided on a few things already. From the previous game jam, I found that I really enjoyed the games that had upgrade systems, so regardless of what kind of game I made, I knew I'd want to include upgrades. The second idea was that I wanted to have online leaderboards. I knew of a few free services that would host leaderboards for me, and there were even tutorials on how to set those up in Unity, but they were just so limited, you could pretty much only store a name and a score. Fortunately, I had just been learning about databases at work, and I saw this as a good opportunity to put that knowledge to use and let my leaderboards have extra details. I won't get into the specifics of how that worked right now, but let me know if you do want to see that, and maybe I can walk through all of it in a separate video. I started streaming a little before the theme announcement because one of my friends from work really wanted to help think of ideas. We passed the time by looking at my previous game and discussing realistic scopes for a 3-day game. Oh, there's the timer. Let's see if we get it. Unstable. Alright. Steve and I came up with this idea really quick. Quick enough that it made me a little worried we might be ignoring better ideas. So we kept brainstorming to have some backups, but we did start drawing out this balancing disc idea, and this was very much inspired by the seesaw level in Fall Guys. After talking through it for a bit, we decided it did sound fun enough to run with it. I switched over to Unity to start throwing a prototype together. I haven't used physics very much in Unity, but I remembered reading about different types of physics joints. We found that the character joint behaved very similar to a ball and socket. Presumably it's meant to be used for character shoulders. This would work perfectly for us since we wanted the center of the table to be the pivot point and be able to tilt in any direction. We knew we were onto a good idea when we had plain gray shapes on the screen, and we still got a good laugh at how wobbly it all was. I went ahead and filled out some to-do lists to keep my work organized. I had things that needed to be done for the core of the game, as well as some nice-to-haves if there was enough time left over. As a programmer, I'm never going to make beautiful art for these game jams. I know where my strengths and weaknesses are. I used Blender to create some very primitive shapes, and assigned different meshes so that I could put a different material on each part. I wrote a script so that when you hold the left mouse button, the game would check for any weights under your cursor. If there was one, any mouse movement would also be applied to the position of the weight until you let go. This was a really good start for Friday night. Just a couple hours after the theme was announced, and the physics portion of the game was already working. Saturday morning, I started by taking care of a few things that I wasn't happy with in the prototype. First up, the dragging boxes around was being done with raycasts from your mouse cursor into the game world. This is fine, but I was trying to be as accurate as possible and capture exactly where on the cube you had clicked. I decided to scrap that accuracy completely and just say the center of the weight would be lifted up by a fixed distance from wherever you were pointing. And this was an important lesson for me to not always go for the most accurate programming and to try every idea because one of them might just click. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that. That just feels like, yeah, I put my mouse cursor. It just feels right. Another really quick change I made was rotating the light source to point straight down. And I'm actually a little embarrassed that I didn't think of this sooner. It's just such an obvious improvement to the gameplay, having the shadows be directly underneath the weights. The next thing I worked on was adding sound effects for grabbing and releasing the weights. And this is the first time I've ever recorded myself making noises for one of these games, so promise not to laugh at me too much. I just feel so stupid sitting here making noises. I picked out the samples that I thought sounded best, ran them through a few filters and effects, and I think they actually ended up fitting in pretty well. Next up was camera movement. I knew it would be easy to separate the camera controls by using the arrow keys on the keyboard, but I was worried that would just come across as lazy and hurt the feel of the game. I decided that using the mouse to control both the camera and the cursor would feel the best, but that led me into issues where I couldn't lock the cursor in place on the screen. To solve this, I added a virtual cursor that's actually just an image on the screen. Your mouse movements are always recorded, but those movements only get applied to either the cursor or the camera based on if you're holding right click at the time. This let me freeze the cursor position and hide it while you're doing camera moves, and in the end, I think it feels very natural. I got all that working and had one last thing to add to the cursor. I remembered the concept of affordance, which is basically telling the users how to interact with an object. By changing the cursor image when players are hovering over a weight, there's a very subtle reaction that makes them say, "Oh, I can click on this." After my lunch break, I redid the cubes, just giving them rounded corners. This really is about the extent of my art skills, but by picking the right colors and the right reflectiveness, I got something I really liked. I even heard comments from people saying, "Ooh, they look like starbursts." I worked on the upgrade system next, just getting the core of it up and running with one upgrade option. I tested that for a little while by myself, and then I figured it was time to get some friends to do some playtesting.
Orta?
Hi.
Portfolio? Can I grab the box in air or no?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I can grab it like, oh, you
Aw,
son of a
yeah. Oh, look at you. This is nice. Ah!
Okay, I got some monies.
CJ had to step away for a bit, but he already showed me that people would definitely try stacking vertically. I needed a way to let the camera lift up and maybe zoom out if the weights started getting really tall. I could use another input for this and let the players control it manually, but something in the back of my mind told me not to do that. I think it was that I wanted players to focus just on moving the blocks. These jam games usually don't get played for more than 15 minutes, so I didn't want players to spend half of that getting familiar with the controls. I decided to automate the camera by measuring the tallest stack in the play area and smoothly animating the camera up so that the spawns and the disc were kept in the field of view. CJ came back a little later and Miller joined in for some more testing.
So I just do that. Oh.
Ooh!
Oh, can you stack these? Nice.
Yeah, buddy. Oh, you are living dangerously.
Oh, can you? Oh, you can grab. Nice.
Yep, you can catch them. Oh, there they go.
Oh,
Oh!
My first thought is just do like a ring, right? And so if you're lined up perfectly with the ring, then
I could make it change colors too.
yeah, and
I'm
so
gonna
or
make it
maybe
glow.
instead of a ring, right, you almost have like almost think of like a radar, right? Where you have like of a circle, you've got like the little quadrants or whatever.
That ring idea was huge and brought so much information into the game. It would stay level in the world, which gave players a reference point to tell exactly how much the disc was tilting. Without it, the camera angle sometimes made it difficult to see. In addition, color coding the material was an immediate feedback of how balanced things were. And lastly, adding a mission to it and some bloom made it glow, which really helped out the look of the game. One of the tough parts though was making the color change from code. I could easily see the rotation of the disc in the X and Z axes, but those numbers were only positive values that wrapped around at 360. So instead of tilting to -1 degrees, It told me that it was tilting to 359 degrees. I could have worked with that, but I remembered something from school that I haven't used in a very long time. The dot product. Without getting too math heavy, the dot product is a formula that can tell you how well aligned two vectors are. So I could take the up vector of the game world and the up vector of the disk, and using the dot product, I could get a value that basically represented how level the disk was. Perfectly level meant I'd get a value of 1, and 90 degrees of tilt would be a value of 0. This was much easier to use in the code because I could use the 0 to 1 value to interpolate between green and red. Next thing to work on was music for the game. And music is even further outside my skill set than art, so I didn't even entertain the idea of making something myself. I was just going to grab soundtracks off the internet that fit my needs for the game. At first I thought it would be cool to have 2 soundtracks that I could blend between seamlessly based on the current tilt. So if you stay nice and level, you keep the calm, soothing music, and as it tilts, the music cranks up and gets more frenzied. This probably would have worked really well and made the game that much more immersive, but it also sounded like something that I'd have to specifically create soundtracks to do. Instead, I just picked out 3 songs that increased in intensity, and I decided to have major steps in difficulty a couple minutes into each round, and those would trigger a song change. I spent the next little while just playtesting and tweaking those difficulty steps, and looking back at my recordings, I realized that so much time was spent just playing the game. And I don't mean to say that like a bad thing. All that testing helped me realize what felt good and bad about the game. It helped me find and squash bugs, and overall just submit a better game. If any other developers are out there watching this, please play your game often while you're making it. Winding down for the night, I decided to flesh out the how to play screen. I knew I was already going with a minimalist look, so I wanted to put as little on the screen as possible. I think my UI turned out pretty good, and I've even gotten quite a few compliments on that part specifically. One thing I really like about working in Unity is that you can test the game display at different resolutions and aspect ratios really easily. This helped me make sure I set my scaling and anchor points correctly so that my UI would look good on any screen size. It was time for a good night's sleep before putting all the finishing touches on tomorrow. It's Sunday morning. It's barely can call it morning. It's 2:30 a.m. I tried to go to sleep. I can't. I just can't fall asleep. So I sat there in bed and decided, if I'm not falling asleep, I should just go get some work done, right? Might as well be productive. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do my best work in this state, so I looked for some of the easy items on my to-do list. A simple one to knock out was making an icon for the game. And this is such a tiny little detail, but it's one that shows the different amount of effort that people put into this. Since we're going to be downloading each other's games after the submission deadline, it's much nicer to get a download with a custom icon and an actual name, rather than just game.exe. I had been just using 3 different sized cubes as my weights, but I wanted a little more variety. I made some more quick models in Blender, again just a primitive shape, then rounding the edges, and those would be introduced at the different difficulty steps. Fortunately, I was finally starting to feel tired, so I closed up the project and went to bed. When I woke up, I put an open invitation in my Discord server that anyone was free to come by anytime and test out the game. While I was waiting, I polished up some UI and worked on the rest of the upgrades. I'll try to cover them all quickly. The springs used a built-in physics component called a spring joint. You can link 2 points, and when the game runs the physics simulation, the springs will try to pull the 2 points back to their original positions. The upgrades just made the spring force stronger. The sturdiness upgrade lets the disc tilt further before breaking. The break mechanic is the lower of these 2 green rectangles on screen. If the disc touches that area, it breaks. So sturdiness just moves it down. And finally, time slow activates in the same way. It's the upper of those green areas. If the disc touches it, I slow down the time scale of the game for 5 seconds. Increased ranks make time get even slower when it activates. In the afternoon, some friends came around to test. They also had some really great ideas. It was just too late, in my opinion, to make changes to the mechanics of the game. But it was definitely awesome having these guys streaming and sharing their thoughts live, because I had the editor open on my other monitor and I could make tweaks very quickly. Then I'd package up a new build, send it to them, and say, here, try that.
It's done.
Oh
It's
man!
done for. It's over. My only issue with slow time is by the time you're at that point, if you've already got some momentum going, like there's nothing you can do because you have like a slight drop.
Yeah.
I mean, removing weight on one side also helps a little bit, but
Yeah, and is immediate.
where's my unimpressed Embry mode? It's not perfectly aligned. They're slightly off.
I think the trick with slow-mo is more not overcorrecting, because now you're just in a spiral.
Yeah, I know. Oh, that's well and truly
Oh! I made up the options page so that players could adjust the music and sound effect volume, as well as some cursor and camera settings. And that was it. I had the finished product and submitted it to the jam. Unfortunately, a strategy was quickly discovered that just tosses the yellow blocks away, since they weren't worth a whole lot of points. It's a little against the spirit of what I had in mind, but I can't deny that it's still really fun. I'll put a link to the game in the description below, as well as a link to the jam submission page. That's all I have for today. Thanks very much for watching.